I felt like even on my own birthday, I was a guest at someone else's party. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. I turned 7. The candles were lit on the cake, but all the attention was on my brother. Alex had won some school drawing contest, and my parents decided that was more important than my candles. Mom told my aunts and uncles how he was a future artist, and Dad proudly repeated, "There is talent in our family." I sat nearby, biting my lip and listening, as my name was not even mentioned. There are photos from that day. You can see me in the photo, small, blowing out the candles, but all the adults' faces are turned toward Alex, who is showing his drawing. Even the camera doesn't seem to be focused on me. I didn't understand the word shadow back then, but I felt it on myself, like the coolness in a room where the light doesn't reach. And it happened every year. My 8th birthday, I was given a toy car, and a minute later my mom said, "Alex, show us your grades." And everyone was around him again. My 10th, I brought home my first math diploma, but my dad just shrugged. "The main thing is that Alex doesn't give up drawing." Then I began to notice that I was a background character in conversations. They even joked about it. "John is reliable, but not bright." It was as if I were a light bulb in the hallway that was always on, but no one appreciated it until it burned out. I wanted to scream, but I learned to be silent. Silent so as not to appear envious. Silent so as not to spoil the family harmony. Silent because every time I tried to remind them of myself, my parents responded with phrases like, "Don't interrupt, John, let Alex finish, you're the older one, be wiser." In the family album, my memories don't feel like my own. They are intertwined with my brother's stories. I am the background. The backdrop for his triumphs. I even stopped waiting for gifts because I knew that the best surprise would not be mine. Now, looking back, I realized that I was raised to live as if my needs were unimportant. It was like a vaccination against attention. You get used to not being seen. And when someone suddenly looks directly at you, you even feel uncomfortable. For a long time, I convinced myself that this was normal. That all older children take a back seat. That my role was to support. But the shadow in which I grew up left a mark. And that's where my story began. Because there comes a moment when a child's silence turns into an adult's debt. And then it's not just that your celebration goes unnoticed, people start to hold you accountable. I didn't know then that the silence at my childhood birthday parties would be a rehearsal for adult life, where I would pay other people's bills for years, and no one would even say, "Thank you?" In my adult version of The Shadow, there were no more candles and cakes. Instead, there were bills, transfers, and endless requests. I worked, earned money, and for some reason it always turned out that the money was not for me. Mom needed it for small expenses, Dad for garage repairs, Alex for a new stage in life. I knew the banking app by heart. The latest transactions always spoke louder than any family words, transfers from me, and silence in response. No one even asked if I had time to save up for anything myself. The phrase, "John, you always come through," became commonplace. And I did come through. Every time. I usually transferred money to my mother's account. She said, "We'll distribute it ourselves as needed." And strangely enough, most of the money always ended up in Alex's hands. It was as if there was an unspoken agreement. I earn, they transfer, and he spends. Meanwhile, Alex lived an easy life. He could sleep until noon, change startup ideas like gloves, disappear for a week, and reappear with a new plan. They called him talented, just not yet realized. I was practical, reliable. It sounded almost like an insult. What annoyed me most was the double standard in my parents' words. When I stayed late at work, they would reproach me. "You think too much about money." But when Alex was unemployed, they would say, "The main thing is for him to find himself. Money isn't the most important thing." I remember once my mom called me in the middle of the workday. "John, could you help Alex? He's in trouble." What about me? I blurted out. I'm in trouble too. I just paid for my wife's apartment and hospital bills. She paused for a long time and said quietly, almost tenderly, You're strong. You can always handle it. Those words stuck with me like a nail. It seemed like a compliment, but in reality, it was justified exploitation. If you're strong, then you don't need support. If you're reliable, then your reliability can be exploited endlessly. For a long time, I convinced myself that this was how it should be. That this was my role in the family. But each new transfer made me feel a little emptier. I saw how they cared for Alex even when he was hurting himself. And at the same time, I was treated like an emotionless ATM. Now I understand. The childish silence I chose back then turned into an adult habit of giving more than I receive. And when I look at my transaction history, it's like a childhood album, page after page, only instead of photos, there are negative balances. I didn't yet know how deeply this role of spare would become ingrained in me. Because the real scene of injustice awaited me not in the banking app, but at the family table. Every family dinner was a repeat of the same scenario for me. The tables were generously set, baked meat, salads, bottles of wine. I came with my hands full. I brought flowers for my mom, a bottle of good alcohol for my dad, sometimes a small gift for my brother. I spent time, energy, and money to make it look like a family affair. But as soon as I sat down at the table, everyone's attention instantly shifted to Alex. He didn't even have to try. He would start talking about his new project, how he had found an investor, how he was about to hit the jackpot. Everyone listened with bated breath. Mom adjusted his shirt collar, and Dad agreed with his every word. My uncles and aunts nodded as if they were sitting in front of a genius. And my gifts were left aside. The flowers were quickly put in a vase without a word. The bottle of wine was pushed aside to save for later. I could even bring a new kitchen appliance that my mother really needed, but she would say, "Oh, thank you," and immediately return to talking about Alex. I tried to participate in these conversations, bring up topics, and share news from my life. But I was interrupted. It was as if I existed only to fill the pauses between my brother's monologues. When I started to share something, my mother cut me off with a curt, "John, don't interrupt, Alex is talking." I thought maybe I really am too boring? Maybe my everyday life at work isn't worth paying attention to? But then I looked at my hands, a little cracked from constantly working with documents, and at my wife's eyes, which were waiting for support, and I realized, I'm doing everything I can to keep this family together. And at the same time, I'm invisible. Once, after such a dinner, I was looking through the photos my mom had posted on Facebook. They showed a festive table, a smiling Alex in the center, glasses of wine, laughter. And somewhere on the edge of the frame, me. Half blurred, like a random guest. In the comments people wrote, "What a wonderful son you have!" And they didn't mean me, of course. It was like a physical blow. I was literally cut off from my own family. I felt like I was back in my childhood, with that cake and strangers' toasts. Only now the difference is that I am an adult, and I know the price of everything that is happening. I pay for these tables, but I am not in the photos. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I stared at the ceiling and thought, if I'm invisible in their eyes and even in their photos, do I even exist for them? And the answer I heard in the silence was too painful. But the real blow was yet to come, when I tried to share the biggest news of my life. When my wife and I found out we were expecting a baby, I was on cloud 9. It was the first time I truly felt that my life had a different meaning, that I would be not just a brother or a son to someone, but a father. I prepared my words, thinking about how to tell my parents so that they would rejoice with me. Inside, I had hope, maybe this time they would really look at me. We arrived on Sunday, as usual. The table was already set. Alex was talking about his latest project, but I decided to overcome my fears. After the first toast, I spoke up and said, "Lisa and I are expecting a baby." I expected at least a minute of silence, hugs, tears of joy. Mom smiled slightly, but her first words were, "Oh, when will Alex finally find himself a girlfriend? He would be a wonderful father." Everyone laughed. Dad added, "Yes, John, you're doing great, but the main thing is that Alex keeps up." And the whole conversation smoothly returned to my brother. I sat with a stony face, trying not to show how it affected me. A single cry echoed in my head. "I'm having a baby. Isn't that more important than your startup fantasies?" But I said nothing out loud. Again. Because no matter what I said, their thoughts still revolved around Alex. When Lisa and I drove home, she asked, "Don't you think they weren't happy for us?" I gripped the steering wheel so hard that my fingers turned white and replied, "They're busy with Alex. They're always busy with Alex." Later that evening, I checked the family chat. I wrote, "We're having a baby. I wanted you to be the first to know." Almost immediately after my message, my mom posted another list. Ideas for Alex's startup. Everyone reacted with emojis, left comments, and began to discuss it animatedly. My message remained unanswered. I stared at that chat for a long time. At one line of text that should have turned their world upside down, and dozens of lines about my brother. And I realized that even the birth of my child was not news to them if Alex was around. It was the first real feeling of betrayal from my own family. And I didn't know yet that they would be able to go even deeper. I always tried to believe that my money was going to something useful. When my parents said that the roof was leaking and they needed help with repairs, I didn't even hesitate. I transferred a considerable amount, even though I was saving for my future child's expenses at the time. I told myself that this was an investment in my family, in the house where we grew up. A few weeks passed. I stopped by my parents' house to see the new roof. But nothing had changed. It was the same old roof, with rain stains on the ceiling. When I cautiously asked about the repairs, my mother shrugged. "Oh, the workers are running late. Alex knows better, he made the arrangements." The next day, I saw a photo on social media. Alex was standing next to a shiny new car. The caption read, "Finally, my dream has come true." The comments were filled with dozens of congratulations, hearts, and words of pride from his parents. I looked at the license plate and felt something tighten inside me. I opened my banking app and looked at the last transfer. The same amount I had given to the roof matched the cost of the car Alex had been dreaming of last year. I didn't even have to do the math, it was obvious. That evening, I sent my mother a message. "What about the roof?" She replied dryly, "Don't worry, Alex will decide. The main thing is that you and Lisa are okay." I sat with my phone in my hands and felt like I had just been made a sponsor of someone else's whims. I could have swallowed it, as I had done before. But something inside me began to break. For the first time, I thought, what if they never intended to repair the roof? What if all my family transfers were just a cover for Alex to live an easy life? The car was parked in the yard, shiny, new, with a perfectly clean interior. And in my house, my wife was already counting pennies to make sure we had enough for a stroller and baby clothes. And I asked myself, why was my son destined to start life with a feeling of deprivation, while my brother started with a feeling that everything comes easily? This question kept me awake at night. Because I saw that the chain in which I was the spare was not limited to childhood. It continued further. And the next link in it was that during the most important months of my wife's pregnancy, the family's attention was again focused elsewhere. During the months when Lisa was carrying our son, I felt particularly keenly that we were left alone. She was tired, her back hurt, and she had swelling. I tried to be there for her in every way. I did the shopping, cooked dinner, took her to doctor's appointments. I waited for my mother to at least call and ask, "How are you holding up?" But the phone remained silent. The only calls I received were about other things. "John, help Alex with the business," was how almost every conversation began. I was told that it was an investment in the family's future. I tried to explain that we had our own expenses, but all I heard in response were my brother's excuses. At the same time, I was standing in the hospital corridor, holding a bag with Lisa's things, looking at a missed call from my mother with the caption, "Urgent about Alex." When I called back, she didn't even ask why I was at the hospital. Her first words were, "Alex is worse off than you are right now. You'll be fine, but he won't." I felt something break inside me. In their system of coordinates, even my wife's pregnancy was no match for his latest crisis. That same evening, Lisa sat in the kitchen with her hands on her stomach. She looked out the window and suddenly asked, "Why do I feel like we're alone? Your parents know their grandson will be born soon, but they act as if it doesn't exist." I was silent. Because deep down, I felt the same way. That was when I first felt that this shadow I had lived with all my life was beginning to cover my own family. And if I didn't do anything, my son would grow up in the same coldness I had grown up in. I didn't know it could hurt so much until I opened my mother's Facebook page. There was a recent photo, Alex in a restaurant, smiling, a glass in his hand. The caption read, "Our pride and joy. We are so happy to see him following his own path." The comments poured in like confetti. "Well done. You should be proud of such a son." I sat in the dark kitchen, the phone shining in my face. Lisa was sleeping in the other room, tossing and turning. I remembered how that day we bought the cheapest diapers we could find and counted every penny to make sure we had enough for a stroller. And they called a man who had done nothing but spend other people's money over the past year their pride and joy. For the first time, I decided to add up all the numbers. When I saw the total amount, my throat went dry. In 2 years I had financed their lives to such an extent that with that money I could have started my own, with my own house and peace of mind. I wasn't rich. I earned a steady income, but it was ordinary money, like thousands of other people. For me, these amounts were huge, but they took them for granted as if they belonged to them by default. I called my mother and asked her directly, "You know we're expecting a baby too. Why didn't you ever write about it?" She sighed and replied, "John, don't be offended. Everyone knows you can handle it. But Alex needs support." That was their mantra, their excuse for everything. And then I realized, I wasn't erased by accident. I was erased deliberately. I will remember the day my son was born until my last breath. Lisa and I arrived at the hospital before dawn. I squeezed her hand, counted the minutes between contractions, and felt fear and joy growing inside me at the same time. And when the room was filled with our child's first cry, I felt as if I was being torn apart from the inside. I cried, laughed, kissed Lisa's sweat-drenched forehead, and felt, this is it, the meaning of my life. When we were allowed to take a picture of the baby, I couldn't help myself. I opened the family chat. I wrote, "We had a son. Mom and baby are doing well." I added a photo, a tiny bundle in a blanket, my hands trembling with happiness. I pressed send, and froze. A minute passed. 2. 10. Finally, a short message from my mother appeared. "Congratulations, take care of yourselves." Cold, without a single emoji, without joy. And a minute later, she posted a photo of Alex with a glass of champagne. In their worldview, even the birth of their grandson was a minor footnote to his celebration. I reread that, "congratulations," over and over, trying to find even a drop of warmth in it. But there was only formality, as if she were responding to a stranger. And when Alex's holiday photos appeared next, I realized that for them, the real celebration was not here in the hospital with their grandson, but there, at the table with champagne. Lisa woke up, saw me sitting with my phone in my hands, and quietly asked, "Have they written anything yet?" I just shook my head. She closed her eyes, and a tear rolled down her cheek. At that moment, I realized that their indifference was hurting not only me, it was already hurting our little family. I held my son in my arms and felt an icy lump growing in my chest. My life had just changed forever. For them, it was nothing. Lisa fell asleep, exhausted. I sat next to her, rocking the baby and checking my phone every few minutes. No. Congratulations. No. We're proud of you. Silence. And then suddenly the screen lit up. My heart pounded in my chest. I thought, here it is, they wrote. But it wasn't a congratulation. It was a new post in the chat, a photo of Alex with a glass of champagne. The caption read, "Today is a big day. We are proud of you, son." Dozens of reactions, emojis, hearts. I stared at the screen and couldn't believe it. On the very night my son was born, they were raising their glasses to my brother. The room smelled of antiseptic and milk. My son was sleeping in my arms. And their phones were lit up with Alex. My message about the birth of my child remained a lonely line above, invisible. And then, for the first time, I felt more than just hurt. It was a real betrayal. Deep, like a knife in the back. And that night was just the beginning of a double celebration in which there was no place for me. The room smelled of sterility and the warmth of a newborn. Lisa was sleeping, hugging a pillow, exhausted after giving birth. Our baby was snoring in my arms, tiny and alive. I looked at him, and at my phone, as if the screen could suddenly come alive with words from my parents. And then I saw a new post on Facebook. A photo from a restaurant, champagne, smiles, glasses raised. Caption: "Congratulations to Alex on the launch of his startup. The pride of the family." The comments were flooded with hundreds of likes and phrases like, "You should be proud of such a son." I scrolled and couldn't believe my eyes. The date and time left no doubt. On the very day my son was born, they threw a party for my brother. Each new photo hit me in the chest. The hall was decorated with gold balloons. Expensive dishes were on the tables. Alex was smiling in the center, a glass of wine in his hand. And in the corner of the frame, I recognized the familiar logo of the catering company. The same one whose services I had paid for a few months ago under the pretext of money for roof repairs. In my hands, my son; in their hands, glasses for my brother. In my life, the most sacred moment; in theirs, another myth about the genius Alex, which could be celebrated at someone else's expense. It was as if I had been doused with cold water. They didn't just forget about me. They made a choice. To celebrate his day instead of mine. To raise toasts instead of at least coming to the hospital, at least calling. I looked at my son and swore he would never know what it was like to be a shadow. His day would never become less important than someone else's. But I didn't know yet, the true face of that party was much dirtier than I imagined. A few days after that night, I received an email. At first I thought it was spam. An attached PDF with a bill. But when I opened it, I felt a chill inside. There it was in black and white, payment for a banquet at the same restaurant where they had celebrated Alex's startup. The customer was my name. My card number. I reread the lines over and over, as if trying to find some kind of mistake. But there was no mistake. That party with gold balloons, champagne, and glasses, for the pride of the family, was paid for out of my pocket. The money I gave for roof repairs or urgent expenses turned into wine and desserts that my wife didn't even allow herself during her pregnancy. And then everything became crystal clear. I wasn't just a spare son. Not just a shadow. I was a source. An ATM. A sponsor of other people's illusions. And they didn't even try to hide it. They just believed that I would never find out. I imagined that moment. My father would make a toast. "We are proud of our Alex." My mother would post photos with hashtags like family pride. And all this, for the money I gave them while sitting in the hospital, holding my son in my arms. I was torn between two feelings. Anger, because they robbed me not only of money, but also of the right to my own happiness. And emptiness, because they never saw me as a person. Only a function. That evening, I sat down at the table and opened my notebook. I began to write down all the transfers, every date, every amount. I wanted to have proof in front of me, so that I would no longer deceive myself. When I added up the total, the figure hit me harder than any of their words. I had financed not only their lives. I had paid for a myth. The myth of a brother. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. Because money isn't everything. What I found later among their papers showed that they had taken much more than dollars from me. I stumbled upon it by accident. I came to help my parents with their paperwork. They always dumped the paperwork on me. There was a stack of folders in the drawer with the contracts. I was flipping through them mechanically until I saw the inscription. Will. It was like a shock. I opened the papers, and my heart sank. My name was not on the list of heirs. Not at all. The house. The land. The accounts. Everything was registered to Alex. I reread the lines over and over, trying to find some kind of clue. Maybe it was a draft, an old version. But no. The date was recent. The signatures were real. Along with the will, I found several printouts of correspondence with the notary in the same drawer. In one of them, my mother wrote directly, "We want to put everything in Alex's name. John can handle it himself, he's strong." I reread this sentence dozens of times. These weren't even hints or family conversations, it was a black and white verdict. My life for them boiled down to one sentence. And that's when I remembered that week. The same week I asked my parents for a small loan for Lisa's hospital bills. When the bills for the tests were piling up, and I was embarrassed to ask for more. They said, "Things are tough for us right now." And at that very moment, they were sitting at the notary's office and transferring everything to my brother. A coldness spread through my chest like ice. I wasn't cut out by accident. I was cut out deliberately. As a person who can manage on his own. And the most painful thing was not even the cut itself, but the words written in the document. I reread the line of the note and felt a tightening inside. "John is strong, he will take care of himself. Alex needs more." They left me with only responsibilities. And they gave everything else to the one who had been living off others for years. Fragments floated through my head. "You're strong, John. It's hard for Alex. You always come through." And now I saw what that really meant. It wasn't support. It was a formula that sent me into oblivion. I put the documents back in the drawer and left without even saying goodbye. It was hot outside, the sun beating down on my face. But inside me, it was a fierce, icy winter. At that moment, I realized that what they had done could not be justified by any words about Alex's weakness, or John's strength. This was the limit. The final one. I didn't know yet how I would tell them this to their faces. But I knew for sure, this conversation would be the point of no return. I carried the coldness of the documents I had found inside me for a long time, but in the end I decided to go to my parents. I wanted to at least hear their explanation. Maybe there was still a glimmer of hope that it was some kind of mistake. We sat in the familiar living room. Mom brought tea, Dad unfolded the newspaper, as if everything was normal. As if nothing had happened. I took out the will and put it on the table. The room fell silent, so thick you could cut it with a knife. "What is this?" I asked. My voice trembled, but my words sounded sharp. "Did you really cut me out of the will?" Mom immediately looked away, as if searching for something in the carpet. Dad sighed heavily and said in an even tone, as if discussing the weather forecast, "John, you're strong. You can always handle it. Alex is weaker. He needs more support than you do." At some point, Alex came out of the next room. He smiled and said to me, "Why are you so upset? That's what you're there for, to help out. You're better at it than I am." His words sounded easy, almost joking, but I felt everything inside me tighten. For him, it wasn't even an insult, it was the truth he believed in. I looked at them and didn't recognize them. They talked about my brother as if they were repeating a prayer that needed no explanation. My blood boiled inside me. "Do you seriously think this is fair?" The words burst out of me in a shout. "I've been supporting you financially for years. I paid your debts, repairs, medical bills. I even paid for his celebration. And you decided I don't deserve anything? Mom reached out to put her hand on my shoulder. I pulled away. John, she said gently, almost sympathetically, we know you can handle it. You have a job, a family, a child. It's hard for Alex. He'll be lost without this. And then Dad said something that killed any hope I had. You're not resentful, are you? He smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was a challenge. Go ahead, swallow this too. You've always swallowed it before. I sat there, clenching my fists so hard that my nails dug into my palms, and felt an icy wave wash over me. There was no more love in that room. Only judgments wrapped in beautiful excuses. I stood up and said, You're right. I'll manage. But not the way you think. And I left, slamming the door so hard that the windows rattled. Behind me was silence and emptiness. And something else was born inside me. Hard as stone. Irreversible. I returned home late in the evening, silent and exhausted. Lisa was already asleep, the baby snoring in the cradle next to her bed. I sat in the dark and stared at my son for a long time. His tiny fingers clutched the edge of the blanket, and it seemed to me that he was holding my whole world. I replayed the conversation with my parents in my head. Their words, You're strong, you can do it, now sounded like a curse. They refused to see me as a person. To them, I am a resource. To them, love has a price, and I was just a payer. That night, Lisa woke up and sat down next to me. She was silent for a long time, holding my hand, and then she said, I no longer want to live in a world where you are always second. And I will not allow our son to grow up in the same world. Her words were simple, but they reinforced my decision. We both understood that there was no turning back. I looked at the little one and realized, he should never have to live in a world of conditional love. Where you are only valued when you are useful. Where you are compared, humiliated, and taught to be a shadow. He deserves a different home. A home where his joy would not be overshadowed by strangers' toasts, where his first steps would not be eclipsed by someone else's talents. For the first time in many years, I felt a sense of determination within me. Not anger, not resentment, just determination. It was like cold iron that can only be bent once before it snaps. And I was not going to bend anymore. I opened the notes on my phone and wrote, Breakup plan. 5 steps. Block the chat. Stop transfers. Pay back my debts to myself. Write them a letter with everything that had accumulated. And most importantly, don't look back. I knew it would hurt. I knew they would call me a traitor. But looking at my son, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that word. Because now my task is to betray the shadow that has held me back my whole life. And that night, I felt that my decision was irreversible. I started with the simplest thing. I deleted the family chat. At first, my hand trembled over the Leave Group button. But when I pressed it, I felt not guilt, but a strange relief, as if I had finally taken off the heavy backpack I had been carrying all my life. The next step was money. I went to the bank and stopped all regular transfers to my parents' accounts. No more. For repairs, for medicine, for Alex's business. Period. In the evening I opened my report, a table with all the amounts I had ever given. And I sent it to my mom and dad. Without explanation. Just the total amount at the bottom, which looked like a final bill for years of silence. A few minutes later, I got a response from Alex on my phone, a simple emoji, thumb up. It was as if he was saying, Okay, I understand. And that was it. No explanation, no shame. That like was probably more honest than all their words in my entire life. The next day, my phone was ringing off the hook. My mom wrote, You can't be so harsh. We're family. Dad left a voice message. John, come back to the table. You know we love you. But I no longer believed those words. I saw how much their love cost. And for the first time in my life, I didn't respond. Not because I was offended, but because I chose myself. I sat in the dark and felt a mixture of bitterness and freedom inside me. Yes, I had just severed my ties with my parents and brother. Yes, I was still pulsing with resentment, still wanting to shout, "Look what you've done!" But instead, something else appeared inside me: space. Space for my life, for Lisa, for my son. I knew that tomorrow they would try to call, to justify themselves or, on the contrary, to accuse me of cruelty. But this time I was not going to respond. Because now I had only one real family. And there would be no conditional love in it. I stood by the cradle and watched my son sleep. His little face, his even breathing, his tiny fingers clutching my hand as if he were afraid to let go. At that moment, I realized that everything that had come before him had lost its meaning. The past years, the eternal silence, the devaluation, the endless stories, all of it crumbled like dust. I picked him up and held him close to my chest. There was only one thought in my head: I would not let him grow up in the shadows. He would not be a spare, he would not be background. His life would be filled with light, attention, and love, which I had once so desperately sought from my parents. I felt the anger dissolve inside me, leaving room for something new: peace. It was not the peace of reconciliation, but the peace of a person who had gone through fire and chosen his own path. I leaned over to his ear and whispered, "You will never be a shadow. In our family, there is enough light for everyone." And when he moved, pressing his cheek against my shoulder, I felt that a new life had been born inside me too. My own. Now it belonged to me and him. And this time, without a shadow.